No need to adjust your eyes. We are back. This is actually happening. Welcome back to another Steelers Saturday Sit Down with Around the 412. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Tyler Weeks of Around the 412. Tyler, it has been a while since we've recorded a regular podcast, let alone a Steelers Saturday Sit Down. How are we feeling this morning?
Feeling good. And I got to say, and I kind of mentioned this to you before we started recording, unintentional hiatus on our part. The last time we recorded was after the Philly game, and then we planned on doing a Steelers Saturday sit down that Saturday while the Ravens and Steelers were going to be playing a few weeks ago. Didn't end up happening. We got a little busy that morning, so we just kind of brushed it off. And then the holidays happened where like the following week was Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, the week after that. So like our normal recording days of when we actually do the weekly podcast were kind of thrown off. Plus my family was in town visiting us and visiting our new daughter, Sydney. And so it was just like thrown off, unintentional hiatus, but we're back. Regular tune schedule from here on out. But what a way to bring it back by a playoff edition of Steelers Saturday Sit Down. Hopefully not the only one, but man, it is good to talk about a playoff game for the Steelers. Hopefully the actual game ends up being better than what a lot of people are thinking. But there's just something. It's a nice crispness to the air when it comes to playoff football.
Yeah, I want to talk about just like the feelings surrounding it, because I feel like the vibes just aren't there of like what typically a Steelers playoff weekend. Probably because of them limping into the playoffs in the way that they are. And honestly, I feel like we owe the fan base and the team an apology. You know, they have not won a football game since we stopped recording. Now, I know that they had lost to the Eagles by the time that since our last recording. That had already happened. We talked about that game, but then they lose 3 more in a row since then. I mean, they were 10-4, sitting pretty to still win the division at that point. I mean, is it our fault that this team did not clinch the division? Is it our fault that this game ended the season on a 4-game losing skid? Which, by the way, only the 3rd team all time to enter the postseason on a 4-game or longer losing streak, which is pretty wild to think about.
That is wild to think about. I wonder how those teams fared in the first round.
1-1. 1-1.
Okay.
So it was the 1986 Lions and the 1999 Jets. The Jets won a playoff game before losing the second round. The Lions lost their first playoff game.
Well, we'll see how it happens for the Steelers, but yeah, maybe it is our fault. We were on a streak, getting it every Saturday, every middle of the week, the entire football season. Like we said, Steelers had some losses in there, but nothing like what we've seen over the month of December. And then you see what happened at the end of the season. Is that our fault? Needless to say, it probably is. And so we need to be better as a podcast. I mean,
Joel thinks it is for sure. He said yes.
We definitely need to apologize to the Steelers and the Steelers fan base. But also, like my daughter, what gives? Sydney, since you've been born, the Steelers are 1-4. We need to up that production.
Well,
you can't have
honestly,
that.
We've talked about it. I know that we're not, this isn't a Penguins show, but like the Penguins have played much better since her birth. The Steelers going the other direction. So I feel like if you would have gone with, Russell or something as the name as opposed to Sydney.
Yeah, I needed to name my daughter Russell.
We're having a different conversation. No, but
I mean, maybe that could have been, but I mean, Sydney, you might be grounded if the Steelers lose tonight, because I think it might be your fault.
What I also think is super interesting to just, and somebody in the comments here just literally just mentioned this because I wanted to talk about the same thing. I mentioned like the vibes throughout the week. I feel like just haven't been there for like a typical playoff week, but it's just like this natural progression throughout the week, right? Like you start the week right after last week's game and you're like, there's no chance they're going to, like, you see that they're 10-point underdogs on some sites at 9.5, somewhere around there now. But you start out thinking there's no chance they're going to win this game. They're just going to end the season on a 5-game losing streak. Change needs to happen. By the end of the week, you've talked yourself into what the path of victory is for the team and believing that they could actually do it. Did the same thing last year against Buffalo, thinking that we were going to be playing in like this snowstorm, saying, oh, this is how you drag that level of competition down. This is how you bring it down to your level. This is the path to victory. Najee Harris seems to run better in those elements. Josh Allen not going to be able to throw the ball as much. We did the same thing last year, in the postseason. Has that happened for you at all? See, I don't know where you stood at the beginning of the week, but I just know this happens for everybody where like people, again, kind of go from, oh, they don't have a chance to right before kickoff. You're thinking, Anything could happen in the playoffs. Has that happened for you at all?
A little bit. But I gotta say, after the weekend had been completed and we knew what the matchups were going to be, and I thought about it a little bit, I honestly thought beginning of the week that this is maybe not on paper, but just for the actual matchup and historical value of it and recent matchups themselves, this is probably the most favorable matchup that I would say the Steelers had in this playoffs if you were on a 4-game losing streak. And now I know that there's teams like they could have played like Houston. And
Yeah.
Houston, at least on paper and everything right now, is a worse team than Baltimore. But I just think that the historical value of the streak the Steelers had against the Steelers, I understand that they lost the last one, but if you look at their defensive players, several key players were injured in that game. What does it look like? Maybe they don't win that game, but how does it look so lopsided if those defensive players are in there? And then I just think the familiarity that you have with Baltimore, this is probably, and maybe I'm completely off on this, but in my opinion, this is a favorable matchup for the Steelers to have if they were going into the playoffs on a 4-game losing streak, just because you have some familiarity there. They've always had a good game plan for Lamar Jackson in their matchups. And I just think that there's a more possible, like I look at going into Baltimore, and I think that there's a more possibility or greater possibility that they go in there and win than going into Houston and winning or just any other matchup that they could have had with the same parameters in place, like having that 4-game losing streak.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I 100% get what you're saying. The reason that I went to Houston, I feel like they're limping into the playoffs as well. I mean, down 2 of their top 3 receivers for the rest of the season. Their offensive line has been atrocious. I don't know. I feel like Bobby Slowick and CJ Stroud collectively have kind of taken a step back, and I want to add context to that, saying I think a lot of that is due to the offensive line play. But last year they were able to mask that very well. We talked about in the Steelers matchup with them last year, they were playing all second and third string guys, and look at the way that they were able to carve up the Steelers defense in that one. Now, what I will say about that is I feel like the Steelers kind of addressed the reason that happened with this past offseason by adding the speed on the back end that just clearly wasn't there. They didn't have the athletes on the second 2 levels last year when they met the Texans. And I think adding a guy like Patrick Queen, adding Dante Jackson's speed, getting Deshaun Elliott in there was kind of answering some of those questions that they had about how they would be able to defend a team like that sideline to sideline. Specifically with the Ravens matchup, you mentioned the guys they didn't have in that second one. I mean, yeah, no Deshaun Elliott, no Larry Ogunjobi, no Dante Jackson, and Joey Porter Jr. got hurt in that game. So, by the time that you were at like halftime, you had James Pierre, getting a ton of reps, and no Zay Flowers, and this one is big. Max brought that up. I agree. I mean, to me, this passing game has kind of always funneled through the tight ends. Mark Andrews, they got Isaiah Likely in there now. But Zay Flowers, first wide receiver in Ravens history to make a Pro Bowl, which is insane to think about. He's the first one in franchise history. But what I will say about Zay Flowers is historically, he hasn't necessarily gotten his against the Steelers. He's kind of one of those, I think he's a main culprit that you look at as to why they didn't win the game in 2023. I mean, he had like 3 drops in that one. Just some weird stuff has happened in the history of this rivalry, especially in recent memory. And I think Zay Flowers has been on the wrong side of a lot of that for whatever reason. But certainly he's a big factor within that offense. I mean, you look at Lamar Jackson, you look at Derrick Henry, you look at Mark Andrews, and then probably him. Within that offense. He is certainly one of their key playmakers. And I'm curious to see how that changes up the way that they match up with these guys. I think Joey Porter Jr. will see a lot of Rashad Bateman. But then where do you go from there? I mean, is it Dante Jackson just one-on-one-ing Nelson Aguilar, a guy that can just run straight line speed? Because that's actually probably a pretty solid matchup for Dante Jackson, a guy that you typically don't want in man. If you are going to have him in man, I think that actually is a matchup that is favorable to him because you're just talking about straight line speed, and that's obviously what Dante Jackson can do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that would be a good matchup. Nelson Aguilar doesn't give you a lot of options as far as like a route runner goes. It is more just like those go routes that could hurt you. But if you have someone like Dante Jackson that, like you mentioned, you don't want to see him in man a ton, but when it comes to just having that speed to be able to match that, I think that's a favorable matchup. I think Joey Porter Jr. would match up pretty well with Rashad Bateman, and then not having to worry about Zay Flowers. After those two, I mean, you look at the wide receiver room in Baltimore, pretty thin. I mean, as far as like wide receiver rooms go, if you're not including Zay Flowers, the Steelers and the Ravens honestly look fairly similar. Like, I think George Pickens is better than Rashad Bateman, but then you look at like the skill set of like Mike Williams at this point in his career and Nelson Aguilar, fairly similar. And then there's just a bunch of fillers after that. Similar rooms. I think that having those guys back, Dante Jackson, Deshaun Elliott, Larry Ogunjobi, it's been specifically Larry Ogunjobi and Deshaun Elliott in this one. I think that that's going to help them in the run game. You look at what happened in the first matchup, and maybe this is a discredit towards like the Ravens game plan in the first matchup, but they didn't run the ball a ton with Derrick Henry. I think he only had like 13 carries in that first matchup, and that was confusing to me. But still, you held Derrick Henry to 65 yards rushing. In the second matchup, I'm pretty sure it was like 168 yards rushing, and then a couple scores and on top of that as well. I think that that's something that they really missed with Ogunjobi and Deshaun Elliott, talking about them specifically, because of what they can bring in the run game. Deshaun Elliott has been a run stuffer from that safety position all year. He's one of their best, if not their best tackler on the defense. And I just think that that was something that is going to be overlooked by a lot of people in that last matchup. Everybody's just going to see the way that the Ravens offense was able to move the ball on the Steelers defense and not look at the why. And when I'm saying that, I mean probably more the national outlook on that game. When you actually look at the nitty gritty, the Steelers are missing a lot of key pieces on defense. You've got all of them back in this one. Everybody's healthy going into this game. And so I think that it's a more favorable turnaround this time around for the Steelers defense, just being a few weeks removed from that last game. I think that just by that, I need to have a better outlook, and people need to have a better outlook, at least from a defensive production for this one.
I also, from the first matchup to the second matchup, something that we saw was a significant jump in the amount of times they were blitzing Lamar Jackson, jumped from about 40% to 60%. I mean, that's just a wild number for them to blitz Lamar Jackson that amount. I mean, that is typically the way that they've had success against him, is kind of getting pressure on him early, firing at him, making him move around and make decisions on the run. Because they've also done a pretty good job in terms of mitigating his legs over the years as well, which people probably don't talk about that enough, just in terms of like looking in a bubble what they've been able to do with him. They don't talk about the leg specifically. But anyways, what I was getting at there is, when I look at this matchup and the way that they're going to defend them specifically, one thing that I'm curious about that we didn't see in the first matchup a ton, going to the second matchup, you got all three of your edge rushers now. Do you see some three edge rusher packages, whether it's, Herbig rushing over the center or whatever they want to do? Because they've also seen, going back to the Cincinnati game, Preston Smith got a sack, literally lined up as a defensive tackle. Like, it wasn't even like a rushing over the center or rushing over the edge with like two guys lined up there. Like, literally he was just lined up as a defensive tackle and not a sack. So they've kind of been moving those guys around a little bit up front. I'm curious to see how much of the three edge rusher package we see. I'm also curious to see like how much. I think we're going to see a ton of just Minka single high, because Deshaun Elliott, I think, is going to have the task of covering Mark Andrews. But then, like, is Isaiah Likely, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, like these linebackers, both the off ball and the edge rushers, to me, are going to have their hands full in this one. I'm curious to see how they get deployed.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting matchup for the Steelers. I think that we talked about some of the creativity that they could get in their edge rushers earlier this season. More specifically, we were talking about TJ Watt and him moving from side to side. But even if you're not going to do that, I think that getting some of these different looks with like the multi edge rushers, you mentioned like putting Herbig over the center, I think that that's going to do nothing but help your case in this matchup. I think the more you throw at Lamar, the more it's going to be tougher to handle. And I think that once those things in these playoff games, once things start to like escalate for a quarterback, I think that starts to accelerate even more, especially like mentally for them. So if you could throw a lot at him and make him more confused as to what's going on from the Steelers side of things, I think that's going to do nothing but help the Steelers. The linebackers, I think, are going to have a tough task in this game. And I think that happens every time they play the Ravens. But when you have the job of also covering tight ends, but also spying on Lamar Jackson, and then also you have to be able to make sure Derrick Henry doesn't get the second level. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Justice Hill's a good receiving back. Like,
the middle of the field, and the responsibility of the linebackers when they play the Ravens is one of their higher matchups from this entire season, and they get to do it 3 times. And I think that's a good thing that they've had to do it a few times already. And like I said, you're getting some of that help back from the injuries, and so maybe that takes some of the responsibility off a little bit, knowing you're going to have Deshaun Elliott back there as well. But still, it's going to be a great matchup. I just think that the Steelers are definitely more equipped this week defensively than they were a few weeks ago, and that should give a lot of Steeler fans confidence going into tonight's matchup that you're going to have all of your guys at your disposal for your defensive side of the ball. Now, the offense, that's a different question about even if you have everybody there, what are they even going to look like? But defensively, you should expect the best from the Steelers.
Well, that's a good transition point. Let's go and talk about this offense, because since that win against the Cleveland Browns, their last one of the season, they've scored 13 points, 17 points, 10 points, and 17 points to finish that season. So no more than 17 points this team has scored in any game over the last 4 weeks. I would think that they have to eclipse 17 points tonight in order to walk away with a win and advance in the playoffs. What have you seen from this offense over the last 4 weeks that is the reason that they are on this 4-game skid? It's all obviously not on the offense. The defense has had communication issues that we talked about on the back end of things, but specifically look at the offense. Why have they found themselves in this hole?
I think you've seen some poor game plans. I mean, even just last week, talking about how Tomlin literally admitted that he changed the game plan for the Cincinnati Bengals versus what scored them over 40 points like a month prior. He changed the game plan from that and decided to run the ball more. A team that is not good at running the ball, even though they run it a lot, that's never going to work. And so I think the game plans in these games, as far as what they want to do offensively, has been something that's held them back. I think Russell Wilson has held them back for sure. I think that he has felt the pressure more. He's been turning over the ball more, and I say felt the pressure. So the offensive line definitely gets some blame as well in these games. But also, just to mention, like in these 4-game losing streaks, they've been playing better opponents. They've been playing better teams. And so while the 4-game losing streak happened, and that sucks, and it was a brutal watch for 4 weeks in a row, I don't think that on the outside looking in at this season, prior to this season, if we would have said that they lose to the Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, and Bengals back to back to back to back, like I don't think that was an outlandish thing to say. But I think when you actually look at how the games unfolded, uncompetitive, quite frankly, for a lot of those games, that's the disappointing part to me. That's the frustrating part to me, and that's the thing that makes me scared for this game. Is looking at how uncompetitive, specifically offensively, they were in these games. I don't know that the Steelers offense is equipped to go on a playoff run once they're playing better competition. And maybe it's enough to win you a game, but I don't even know that there's necessarily a clear path for them to win a single game based off what we've seen over the last 4 weeks. I just don't think that they're really doing anything well. They're not passing. They're like distributing the ball that well. They're not getting the ball out from Russell Wilson's standpoint. He's not being a confident quarterback in the pocket. You're not getting a clean pocket a lot of the time. You're not being able to run the football a lot. And the only thing that they can do well sometimes is throw it deep and have a guy catch it, like the moon balls. That's the only thing that they can sometimes do well. Everything else, though, it's just been completely flipped on its head from what we saw in the middle of the season from this offense.
This offense does 2 things well, and they're not necessarily things that you can build around for a season-long thing, but for 1 game, maybe you can. They're really good at hitting the deep ball, and they're really good in the screen game this year. Now, they haven't used a ton of...
I'm sure Steelers fans will love that.
You can't run 15 deep balls and 15 screens and say that's our offense, but I think for 1 game, say you hit 5 or 6 explosives, whether that is whatever combination of it takes to get, like, that's the path that they have to have for victory here. Like, if it happens, if the Steelers pull off this win, it's going to be because they hit 5 or 6 explosive plays combined in the pass game and run game, or, screen game, kind of an extension of the run. So in the screen game as well, obviously would be a part of that too. But yeah, I mean, Russell Wilson to me over the last month has taken a huge step back from where we were at. I'm sure the level of competition plays into that as well. And I'm not absolving the offensive line completely from the way that they've played, but the one thing to me that he was doing before that he isn't doing now is getting the ball out quick. Like the best way to mitigate a poor offensive line is getting the ball out of your hands. Now, I'll say, going back and watching some of these games, I don't think that there's been many easy buttons for them to press. Like they don't have and this goes, to Artie Smith and obviously the lack of talent that there is. It kind of all goes hand in hand. But this offense just doesn't have any easy buttons in the pass game to just say, hey, here's what we need to hit for 5 or 6 yards just to get us out of this position and keep us ahead of the sticks on first down or whatever it might be. Which, by the way, I know people have been talking about this a lot, throwing the ball on first down. And yeah, I get it. They need to not be as predictive as just run, pass. But they're also so bad at passing on first. Like, I don't know what the path forward is for this offense. Kind of goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. Yeah, it's deep balls and screen game.
They want to use the RPO too, which is why they have to run pass more than people are going to want to do. They want to do the RPO. That doesn't really work if you just go pass. That's not how it really works.
And to your point though, offense. About Tomlin switching the game plan before that game against Cincinnati, that is, an alarm to me. That's a red flag right away. Like I thought the whole point of bringing in an offensive coordinator like Arthur Smith, who's been around, been there, been a head coach, was so he didn't have to have his hands on the offense. Like I thought the whole point was to take a step back there. And it's pretty alarming to me that he's got his hands over this offense as well. So don't like that. But also, they're not an efficient running football team. The Ravens are the best against the run. Like that, so they aren't going to be able to run the football against conventional wisdom would tell us they're not going to be able to run the ball against the Ravens in this one. There has to be a different path forward. I'll be honest, and I'm not just saying this because he's our boy. I think the one thing that they might be able to do like this is if you get Pat Freiermuth lined up against our Darius Washington or Malik Harrison, those are probably the two matchups that you can kind of take advantage of. I like George from a talent standpoint against pretty much anybody. I just figure, man, they're probably going to have 2-3 guys paying attention to that side of the field. Like one thing that the Ravens have done really well the second half of the season, man, they were struggling defensively in the first matchup that we talked about. They brought in Dean Pease to give Zach Orr some help on the defensive side, give him another set of eyes. They've been playing Kyle Hamilton and Marlon Humphrey a lot more towards the middle of the field. Hey, good news for the Steelers, they don't target there anyway. But they've been playing more towards the middle of the field and just kind of taking that away and condensing it. And it's changed completely their defensive production. They've been really good on that side of the ball as a whole. Certainly can't run against them. Maybe to make some plays through the air, but again, it's going to have to be, hitting George down the field and making them honor that part of the field. So I don't know. I'm really concerned about the Steelers' ability to move the foot. And even if they move the football well, what we've seen is how bad they've been in the red zone. Third down, fourth down, red zone. Those are areas, the money areas the Steelers have really struggled in.
Well, hey, we proved it this year that you can beat the Ravens by just kicking field goals. So that should give you a little bit of confidence if you're a Steelers fan that you can beat them without having to score a touchdown. But obviously, we wanted to score a touchdown. It's almost like watching the Steelers offense. I mean, actually, watching it may be even worse than actually performing in it. But the Steelers offense just seems like it is just a struggle every single play. When Steelers win 5-2.
5-2.
That would be great.
Pirates over the Orioles.
But watching the Steelers offense, it just seems like every single play, every single down is a struggle. That's not something you want from your offense. And you mentioned they don't have any bread and butter, and they don't have any plays that they can get an easy 4 or 5 yards. And every single time they are struggling out there. You've gotten several 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations this year where it's like they can't pick up a yard. And Tomlin was right when he talked about the Bengals. Like, if we can't pick up a yard, we don't deserve to win. Well, I agree with you. You did not deserve to win in that case. The offense has been very putrid. And I know that we're going to talk about this on the actual Steelers podcast and everything, but I feel like since we haven't talked over the last few weeks, I want to bring this up now just to get your thoughts on it because we haven't talked during the weeks. Has this past 4 weeks, because I would assume that we were both in the same boat, not necessarily even if we wanted them to, but based off the way Russell Wilson was playing, it seemed like Russell Wilson was going to get an extension This was at least up to the Eagles game. Does this change your mind at all on how you think the Steelers are going to view this quarterback position?
How they're going to? No. Well, I'm not interested in signing up for more Russell Wilson, to be honest with you, because of his age and the trajectory, right? Like, I think it's very alarming the way that he's played down the stretch at his age for me. From the Steelers' perspective, I still think they're going to bring him back, but I don't think you're looking at the same contract as maybe what we were talking about. Maybe he's signing up for more one more year, somewhere like 12 to 15 million dollars. Like, honestly, like, is he going to do better than that? Like, there wasn't a team that was giving him a second year on the open. Like, that is why he came to the Steelers on the minimum. They were. Yeah. It's not like, he can say what he wants. If there was a team that would have been willing to guarantee him money in year 2, he's not in Pittsburgh right now. So I don't know that a team, based off what they've seen down the stretch here, is now going to suddenly offer him a lucrative deal like 3 years, 100 million or something like that. I think his best bet is probably to sign 1-year contracts the rest of the way. And I think that next year it happens in Pittsburgh. Like, I honestly, my mind has kind of flipped where I would probably prefer them to bring Justin Fields back and build an offense actually around him and hand him the keys earlier. I don't think that they opened things up to him early in the season. If you knew he was your starting quarterback, that wouldn't be the case. You obviously would go forward planning, making game plans surrounding him being your quarterback. But I'm just, there's nothing that excites me about an Arthur Smith, Russell Wilson pairing going into next season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it since we haven't literally talked the past.
Not what I thought you were going to ask me, by the way.
What did you think I was going to ask you?
So we can have this conversation too, because we haven't talked for so long. I thought you were going to go the Tomlin route and ask me about where I was at with Tomlin based off the last 4 weeks. I mean, we can have that conversation too. Obviously, we don't know the result of the playoff game, but if you would have told me before the year that this team's going to be 10-7, go to the wild card game, and obviously we don't know the result of it, but very heavily projected to lose this game, that's kind of what I expected would happen at the beginning of the year. Like, this is exactly where I thought the team would be. I think it's frustrating how we got here, sure, because they started out 10-3 and then end the season on a 4-game losing streak. I'll be honest, to me, I still think they're overachieving from a roster perspective. Like, if you look at the roster, I think 10 wins is overachieving for what it says this team should be on paper. So to me, that's a cap tip to Tomlin as a coach. Now, the rest of the factors come into play in terms of the job that Mike Tomlin has. Brought up the fact that he changed a game plan before a game to do something that they do not do well. They wanted to run the ball into a brick wall 50 times after the way that they performed in that first matchup. That's a red flag to me, especially when you brought in a guy like Arthur Smith. Number 2, people have talked about this all the time, is the coordinator hires. Now, Arthur Smith to me is a little bit different. Like, I don't know what his contract is, but they had to have spent up a little bit. I mean, that's an actual legit offensive coordinator. I know that it hasn't necessarily gone super well here in year 1, and there's some question marks about, the pairing, but he's got to be relatively nicely compensated. Like, this isn't your Matt Canada route. This isn't your Randy Fichtner route. Like, Artie Smith's making some money. But on the defensive side of the ball, obviously it's people just feel like that's just kind of like somebody in place. Like, it's really Tomlin's defense. Terrell Austin's certainly there. Maybe he is calling the plays on a down-to-down basis, but it's Tomlin's defense. And honestly, it's not even Tomlin's defense. It's something they've been running like well before Tomlin that they just like to do. It's kind of just whoever's here is going to run that defense. And he obviously has a huge hand in terms of the personnel that they bring in, whether it is free agency or drafting. Like, there's no one. Like, I mean, if you still don't know that, I'm telling you right now that Mike Tomlin has a very large hand in who is brought into this organization player-wise. And so if you want to say that you feel like the roster should be further along than they are right now, that to me is where you can place some blame on Mike Tomlin, not the week-to-week coaching job that he is doing. Because again, I think if you look at the roster and tell me this team won 10 games, that's a pretty good coaching job, because I don't think that this is a 10-win roster talent-wise.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the Tomlin conversation is always a tough one to have, because there are good and bad things about Mike Tomlin. Like, if you ask anybody that's played for him, they love Tomlin. They don't want to play for anybody else. But out from the outside looking in, it just seems like a lot of the decision making as far as like the head coach makes very questionable at times. And then ultimately, when people don't get the team result that they want, a lot of the blame from the fan base is going to go on Tomlin. And I don't think that the track record for the Steelers' success in the postseason necessarily aligns with just putting the blame on Tomlin. I mean, you look at that game that they had against Cleveland. The game against Cleveland, I mean, that got off to a terrible start with the snap from Marquise Pouncey, and that one was terrible. Then you played Kansas City, you played Buffalo. I mean, and anybody who realistically thought the Steelers are going to win either of those matchups, I feel like if you're just adding fuel to the fire for that conversation, you're kidding yourself. They weren't going to win those matchups.
You're disappointed specifically with the defensive performances in those. Like, they've given up 35 plus points in 4 straight playoff games. That's obviously not good enough from that side of the ball. But yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Like, context is necessary. We all appreciate everything that Big Ben did for this organization. Look at the way that he played in those most recent playoff games.
And looking at, you want to talk about team success, look at the quarterbacks that they've had. They had crippled Big Ben in 2020 and 2021. You had Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson at this stage in their careers. Like, you have not had, at the most important position, you have not had a Pro Bowl caliber level of play at that position since 2018. And I just don't think that you can judge a lot of the success for Tomlin based off of those parameters. Now, does that remove blame from Tomlin in a lot of things? No, it doesn't. I just don't think that all of this is on Tomlin. I don't think that this 4-game losing streak is necessarily on Tomlin either. I think that a lot of the blame is unnecessarily thrown at him, even though I do acknowledge that a lot of the blame has to go towards the head coach in some areas. But I just feel like everybody is very quick to say remove Tomlin, and I don't think that there's a better solution on the horizon. What do you want to do at head coach after that too? That's another conversation, different conversation. But as far as like replacing Mike Tomlin goes, what is your succession plan going to be? Are you just going to promote Arthur Smith? And this is me just thinking like a Steelers will, taking the cheap route. Are you gonna promote Arthur Smith to head coach? And
throw $15 million at Ben Johnson.
Also, I would say this is also my opinion. I would try to get Ben Johnson if they were to move on. Like, I would completely flip the script on what the Steelers have had historically in their career.
By the way,
Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin, all defensive coaches. The next head coach, when and if that Steelers head coach is going to be coming anytime soon, please be an offensive coach. I would love a change of pace, love a change of. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would. Yeah. I just want it to happen.
I would say the funny thing about it is, if the Steelers were part of this coaching cycle, my prediction is they'd want Aaron Glenn because of the type. He almost seems like another Tomlin to me. Like, you listen to that dude talk. I think he's an extension off of Dan Campbell. Like, he's taken so many qualities from him in terms of the mentality and the way that he speaks. But there's also like just a part of me that I saw his interview on the Pivot, and I'm like, dude, this is like another talk. Like, I think that is the dude that they would want if they were looking for a coach in this cycle. I don't think that they would go the offensive route, but not even a conversation to me worth diving super into because Mike Tomlin's not going anywhere. Again, the criticism to me falls more on the off the field. And I'm not even talking about like the locker room stuff by any means. I'm talking about from a player personnel perspective, who and when they are bringing them in, who they are trusting. I think there's too much trust in people that haven't earned it on the coaching staff. And also just like not a big enough coaching staff. And I think that's also like placing blame on Rooney in the way that they spend as well. So that's where I'm at with that side of things. But again, we're talking beyond this wild card game now. So to kind of reset and get us back on track there, I don't know that I have anything else to say from, an offensive defensive perspective. I'd like to say that we have the advantage special teams wise, and I certainly think that we do in terms of the kicking game. Chris Boswell over this version of Justin Tucker that we see in 2024. But I'll be honest, I think it's kind of gotten lost because of the offensive defensive struggles over these last 4 weeks, which, by the way, I think it's encouraging the way that the defense were played against Cincinnati. just the one touchdown on the opening drive. But if you're holding them to 19 points and just making them kick field goals, I think that's the path to slowing down that passing attack. I was relatively encouraged by that. But anyways, beyond that, when you look at the offensive defensive struggles, I think it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. Special teams, I think, has taken a step back. Whether, Corliss Waitman has not been punting the ball nearly as well. The coverage units have been giving up bigger chunks in the return game. Like, I don't know that there's like a direct correlation. I don't know what the reason is. But I mean, that's, if your teams are starting at like their own 40 now, as opposed to their own 25, that's a massive difference. And it certainly will be in this game against the Ravens if that continues.
Sure. And I think that's something that does get lost in the shuffle. People are just going to focus on offense and defense. Rightfully so, but at the same time, field position battle matters, and special teams has been something that the Steelers have been able to rely on all season, except for the last few weeks. Outside of Chris Boswell, first team All-Pro, by the way. Shout out to him. Also, first team All-Pro Cam Hayward. Oh man, 35 years old. What a credit to him.
I believe I haven't looked into it. I saw somebody tweet this, and I was like, I'm just gonna take their word for it because I hope this is true. That he's the first team All-Pro, 35 years old or older at the defensive tackle position. That's pretty sweet.
That is cool. Yeah, even if it's
by
not
the way,
true, I like the stat.
Hold on. Before you keep in mind that we were talking about special teams here, so we can go back to it. That's for the comments too, in case we forget. But I think we have to direct this conversation real quick to Cam Hayward, because I asked this yesterday to Alan and DB on Afternoon Drive. You might have already felt like Cam Hayward was a Hall of Fame player, but like this season that he just had at 35, first team All-Pro, regardless of not having the team accolades, that has to like kind of put a stamp on it, put a bow on it, whatever word you want to use, right?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a much larger case than there was entering this season for him to be in the Hall of Fame. Now, I'm kind of like how do I put this? A Hall of Fame hater in the sense of I feel like the Hall of Fame is Hall of Very Good at times and not the Hall of Fame. Like, to me, Hall of Fame, and I think that we've kind of talked about this before, or at least I think we have, is like you can't tell the story of the sport without these players. You can't tell the story of a franchise without these players. Like, I feel like there's certain times where, and this is not just football, but in Hall of Fames in general, I feel like Hall of Fame has become Hall of Very Good. Prior to this season, and maybe this is a bad take on my part, if Cam Hayward would have been in the Hall of Fame prior to this season, I would have said that's like a Hall of Very, Very Good player. Not necessarily a Hall of Fame player, but to have the resurgence that he did at his age and be first team All-Pro, have 8 sacks, double-digit tackle for loss, and it's just the impact that he had, and honestly exceeding the level that we probably ever thought he would get back to, that is something that can put him over the top for a actual Hall of Fame ballot in my book.
I think to your point, maybe if he would have gotten in, it would have been a lot like, rewarding him for being a one helmet guy.
Yeah.
And just being and obviously with that franchise, you look at the Hall of Fame monitor, there are certainly guys that are not in the Hall of Fame that are above him. Ndamukong Suh, Fletcher Cox, Geno Atkins come to mind. He could pass Geno Atkins, though, for sure, still over the next couple of years. Might pass Fletcher Cox over the next couple of years as well. But there's guys that are under his Hall of Fame monitor score as well. So I think it all just depends. The one thing that I will say is, to tie this back into the playoff conversation, he doesn't have the playoff success, obviously. Just how many playoff games has he even won? Is it just the?
I think that he's only won the 3 in 2017, or the 2 in 2017, because I don't think that he was involved in the Super Bowl.
You mean 2016?
Well, the games took
2016, 17. Okay, yeah. I got you. But like, he doesn't have like the playoff moments. Like he has 1 sack in 8 career playoff games, 2 tackles for loss in those 8 playoff games. So I don't know. Maybe that's something to watch for tonight. Like, win or lose, do we see Cam Hayward kind of have like a playoff moment? Derek brought up a great example, like, of a player elevating in the playoffs. Like, Lamar Woodley was a very good player in general, but you don't think of him as like, one of the all-time greats, or like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Lamar Woodley, but the dude in the playoffs, like, he has several multi-sack games, He has like 11 career sacks or something in the playoffs in 8 games, which is crazy. Like there's
Honestly, when I
an
think of
example of a
Lamar
guy
Woodley, I think of the Ravens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think of the Ravens and specifically Super Bowl 43, the plays on Kurt Warner at the end of the game. But yeah, he's one of those guys that, just elevated his game to a different level in the playoffs and certainly against the Ravens specifically. But yeah, does Cam Hayward make his mark in this one? I think that's something to watch tonight because, again, he's had a Hall of Fame caliber conversation type career. We could certainly have the conversation surrounding it. Does he put a stamp on it by having some moments in the playoffs? That's something to watch tonight. But anyways, yeah, I feel like we had to divert the conversation real quick to appreciate the season that Cam Hayward had. But yeah, back to the special teams conversation. I don't know, you were giving your thoughts on the fact that they've kind of taken a step back in that area.
Yeah, outside of Chris Boswell, not been as good lately, and I think that that's something that the Steelers need to get back to. It kind of gets lost in the shovel, like I mentioned, with the offense and defense also not performing well. But I think that something to that and why maybe the coverage is not as good and why their punting is not as well. I feel like bad play just kind of breeds bad play. And whenever you're not playing well offensively, you're not getting good outputs from your defense as well. I feel like just the poor play will breed more poor play, and it kind of spreads to the entire team. And that's how you can kind of see these things snowball. And so that's why I think that you can get into a losing streak similar to this, because not only are you playing better competition in these games, but you're also playing poorly. And I feel like when you get in the habit of playing poorly, it's kind of like almost even if you're not thinking this way, but like it's in like an unconscious expectation that you have that you're going to play poorly, especially against this better competition. And that's something that I think that could have affected not just the special teams, but the entire team as a whole over the last 4 weeks.
Perp Legend said, this should be the last live for y'all. Ravens will end your season today. Very possible. We're about to give our predictions for what's going to happen today. Hey, if you're trying to get us, it's not going to work. Listen, we've had Ravens fans in here. Remember, there was that one dude that was like really cool going back and forth. I can't think of what his username was, but when we were playing the Ravens both times, he ended up having, because when we put out, I know we didn't do a Steelers Saturday sit down that Saturday, but we ended up talking about the game during the week. And I remember he left a comment in the comments about the game as well. But anyways, Perp Legend, hope you enjoy the game today. You're not gonna get under our skin, pal. We love going back and forth. We love to talk. Anyways, yeah. So I don't know if do you have anything else to add about the matchup before we give our predictions?
Nothing in particular.
Okay. All right, so we will give bold predictions as well as score predictions. You guys know the drill if you've been here in the past. You also, if you know the drill, if you've watched Steelers Afternoon Drive already, my prediction was already made on there, so I will go first because there's not as much anticipation for what I'm going to say if you've watched that already. The number is 3. I think in this game, it's not so much a bold prediction to say the quarterbacks are going to have 3 combined turnovers. That's not a huge number. 1.5 per is not at all a huge number, which, by the way, Lamar Jackson, only 4 interceptions this year. Unreal year. 2 of them have come against the Pittsburgh Steelers. One in each of their matchups. Peyton Wilson and Minka Fitzpatrick both having interceptions against them. So, yeah, the quarterbacks combined for 3 turnovers. That's not that bold, but the other side of it, also including number 3, the tight ends in this game combined for 3 touchdowns. I'm not going to tell you which ones it's going to be. Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Charlie Kolar. I guess Michael Pruitt's going to go, which was not anticipating. He was a limited participant, then a DNP, and then had no game designation. So figure that one out. So he's going to be part of it as well. Connor Hayward, I don't know. The tight ends are going to score 3 combined touchdowns. That's my prediction.
That would be pretty wild to me because I'm not even sure the Steelers are going to score 3 touchdowns in this game.
Yeah, so probably the Ravens 2 and the Steelers 1.
Yeah. Bold prediction for me, I think that I'm debating on whether I want to think that George Pickens is going to have a good game or not, because I do really think that he is their best chance to win this game.
He's got a team find coming his way for sure. I can tell you that.
For what?
He didn't speak to the media this week.
Oh, who cares?
And you're required to. I'm just saying you're required to. Like he has to. So the fact he didn't, he's going to be getting fined.
But I'm not. I know that they're going to be keying on George Pickens, but at the same time, if the Steelers want to have anything going offensively, I feel like it has to go through him for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so I'm going to say that George Pickens has over 150 yards receiving in this game because you're going to get multiple deep balls to him. He's going to be their offense. And I'll say he has a touchdown as well to that.
Okay.
I really think that the deep ball is going like you mentioned, like two things that the Steelers do well: screen game and deep ball. Deep ball, I feel like you've seen at times where Russell Wilson basically just says, "F it, George is down there somewhere," and he throws it in his direction, and George comes down with it. I think that you are going to see that at times in this one.
I have to look up something, but I was going to bring up something regarding George. There's a lot of Steelers in the next time that they lose will be the last game that they play. Of course. I mean, this always happens. You have roster turnover, specifically with the offensive side of the ball. I think that this team is going to look a lot different next year. And I wanted your take on that. If you let me give a bold prediction right now for the Steelers offseason. The next game that the Steelers lose will be the last game of George Pickens' Steelers career. I do not think he's a Steeler next season.
So what if the Steelers win the Super Bowl?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's going to
happen. So you kind of put yourself in a corner in that one.
Well, if he has 150 yards and a touchdown today too, I'm wondering, does that, like, you hate to think one game changes people's minds on things, which, by the way, he's only had over 150 yards once. The game against Cincinnati last year where he had 195. So that would be massive if he has 150 yards and a touchdown in this one. Yeah, well, that's just my. I don't think that they're going to win the Super. The thing is, like, I'll put this out there right now. If they win this game, you can bet your bottom dollar on next week's Steelers Saturday sit down that I'm not going to pick them to win that game. So I'll just put that out there right now too. That I think the ceiling of this team is winning a wild card and losing the divisional.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I just was saying, like, you said that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the way that I said that could
technically they couldn't. they could just not lose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know it's bold. I know it's probably not going to happen. But would it be bold if I said something that was probably going to happen? That's the thing. So
no, absolutely not. So I like it. I think the Steelers obviously need that to happen to win. Now we'll find out if either of us think that they're going to win. Again, if you watch Afternoon Drive, not much anticipation for what my pick is here. I am 0-3 the last 3 Steelers games in terms of picking the game, because I have picked over the last 3 weeks. I picked the Steelers to beat the Ravens, Steelers to beat the Chiefs, and Steelers to beat the Bengals. None of those things happened. One of them was complete hopium on my part with the Chiefs, and I don't typically go with my heart over mind, but for 1 week, I definitely did. So for that, Steelers fans, you are welcome, because I am picking the Baltimore Ravens to win this game and end the Steelers season exactly how I would have said is going to happen before the season. I said 10-7, wild card, lose wild card weekend. I think that's the way that it shapes up. I got the Ravens in this one, 26-18. I think that the defense, by the end of it, we're saying they played pretty well. I think that they'll hold the offense down and do their part. I just do not trust this offense to be able to move the ball, to be able to put the ball in the end zone against this Ravens defense that has looked a lot better in the second half of the season. I think they're trending in the right direction. I think the Steelers are trending in the wrong direction. I think we'll be relatively okay with the defensive performance. I think they'll keep them in the game. I think that we're still, invested in it in the fourth quarter, but I think the Ravens pull this one out 26-18.
I think that the defense is definitely going to make its mark in this game. I think that you were going to get a better sense of the sense of the first game, at least from a defensive standpoint, than you did than that second game. Health has a lot to do with that. And you look at what the Ravens were able to do in that second matchup. Honestly, on third down, the defense was still solid. Like, they were 4 of 11, I believe, or 4 of 10 on the second matchup, 4 of 11 in the first matchup. So not that different on third down. The difference was they weren't getting to third down as much in that second matchup as they were in the first one. And you had way more. You had like double the first downs than the first matchup did. I think that the Steelers defense is going to carry them to this win. I think that the Steelers are going to win because of what I said early in this show. I just think that despite what happened in their most recent matchup, the Steelers defense got healthy. You have familiarity with the opponent, and there's always just something about playing the Ravens, and not necessarily one side or another, whether the team is better or worse. The Steelers have had success against the Ravens and against Lamar Jackson. They've had a good game plan against Lamar Jackson. I feel like the Steelers are going to win, or at least I've talked myself into the Steelers are going to win. What does that outlook look like offensively? I have no idea. My bold prediction was literally George Pickens over 150 yards and a touchdown. I don't think that that is necessarily realistic, but like I mentioned, that's bold. I really feel like somehow the Steelers are going to squeak this by, and then after that, they probably lose the following week. But I really feel like they're going to break their streak.
If your bold prediction happens, I would say the Steelers are going to win too.
Yeah.
150 receiving yards from George and a touchdown. I think
it'd be pretty wild if that happened and they didn't win, because then I'm like, what did the rest of the offense do?
Yeah, right.
But I think the
Russell
Steelers
has like
win.
15 completions, 10 of them to George.
Yeah, I think they're going to be good defensively. I think that they're going to win the turnover battle. That's another big thing that they did in the first game, and they lost in the second game. They lost the turnover battle in that second game. And I'm going to put a score on this of the Steelers winning 20-18. I think it's going to be a close matchup. I think it's going to be we're going to have to. I know I take blood pressure medicine. I'm pretty sure Smitty does. We're going to have to up the blood pressure medicine for this weekend. But I think it's going to be a close matchup. I think that the Steelers are going to squeak by. I think they're going to have the benefit of having several Boswell field goals. I feel like the Steelers are going to win for some reason, and I don't know what that reason is outside of me talking myself into it, because everything outside of this, everything is saying and pointing to the Steelers are going to lose this game. The Steelers might get embarrassed in this game. They've got no right to win this game. And yet, for some reason, I think they're going to win it.
You have a 2-point victory. So does Allen, actually. And he has Justin Tucker missing a field goal. Like, that's being the difference, which, by the way, I would love. There's a lot of players individually on Baltimore that I actually like. Like, I love Lamar Jackson. I just wish he wasn't on the Ravens. I can't stand Justin Tucker. I can't stand him. So, like, I would absolutely love if the reason that they lost is because of him missing a field goal. Tristan says +10 spread as well. I agree with this. I think this is a prisoner of the moment line. Like, I think that you just look at the way that Baltimore played down the stretch and the way Pittsburgh down the stretch, and they slapped this line on it. Biggest spread of the weekend. I just think it's throwing everything out the window that like you shouldn't. Like, I think the things that should be thrown out the window are the way that these two teams have played down the stretch, because we know what happens every time that these two teams meet up. I picked the Ravens to win, but I think it's closer than a 10-point game. You add in how cold it's going to be. It's not expected to have like a snowstorm like at one point we thought that there might, but obviously still going to be very cold. The way that, like, the identity of the two teams, if the Steelers even have an identity, offensively at least, but they kind of mirror in terms of the Steelers want to run the ball. They aren't very good at it. The Ravens want to run the ball. They are good at it. They're good at everything offensively, though. So I don't know. I don't see a 10-point spread here. Like, I think that this is just the books really putting too much stock into the way that things ended for both teams. Because we see the Steelers-Ravens matchups, to me, head-to-head, mean more than what those last 4 weeks for either team do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the spread is, I mean, the common saying would be that I think that the Steelers cover, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to win. Like, I predict that they're going to win, but like, I feel like majority of people, Steeler fans, even if they don't think they're going to win, they probably are going to think the Steelers are going to cover.
26-18, I got the Ravens winning by 8, so that would be them covering. And also, there might be like a late score in there to make it. Like, it might be 23-18, the Ravens kick a field goal, So the Steelers have to go get a touchdown in the 2-point conversion, end up turning the ball over on the last drive. I think I just wrote the script for what's going to happen. But anyways, let us know what you think about it. We appreciate everybody that was in here. A lot of people in here, 338 to be exact at this very moment. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you are here right now. Or if you are watching back, leave us a comment with your prediction and your bold prediction as well. Tyler, anything else before we get out of here?
No. Ratbirds down. It's not often that the game is happening the day we're doing this. So, yeah, like I don't know what you'd do. Like, I guess like bird down. I don't know. I don't know what the hand signal would be, but I feel it in my bones. Like I feel like the Steelers are going to break that playoff streak, and they're actually going to win a game.
I really hope that we're on here doing a divisional round Steelers Saturday sit down. But if not, we appreciate everybody that's been a part of these on Saturday. They've been a lot of fun to do. The regular podcast back on schedule next week, as well as a live stream that we got to do for the prize giveaways for this year's Rocking Around the 412, which we have not done yet. That's been the biggest thing that people are probably missing with us not doing the podcast for a few weeks, as we haven't gotten around to doing the prizes for Rocking Around the 412. So stay in tune for that. Follow us on everything at Around the 412, so you'll stay up to date on when we are going to do that. Again, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, tell a friend to tell a friend. For Smitty, for Tyler, this has been another Steelers Saturday Sit Down, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.